This is not a sensational story. It is not a moral judgment. And it is certainly not an attempt to reduce a human being to a label. What we are about to explore is far more precise and far more uncomfortable. This is an inquiry into how the human mind constructs patterns it cannot escape. Who this lecture is for. This conversation is designed for three specific audiences. First, those who feel trapped inside their own repetition. People who quietly ask themselves, why do I keep making the same choices? Why can't I stop, even when I want to? If that question feels familiar, then what follows may serve as a cognitive map, not of behavior, but of structure. Second, those who are close to someone living in this pattern. From the outside, such behavior often appears reckless, excessive, or even self-destructive. But when you understand the underlying architecture, something shifts. Judgment begins to dissolve into recognition. Third, those who want to understand the deeper mechanics of human psychology, because this is not merely a case study. It is where modern clinical psychology intersects with ancient philosophical insight, examining three core forces: desire, attachment, repetition. A critical clarification. Let's establish something with clinical precision. Compulsive sexual behavior is not primarily about sexual desire. It is about emotional regulation. More specifically, it is the use of pleasure as a tool to manage pain. This distinction is foundational. Without it, every interpretation that follows will be distorted. An ancient insight reframed. In the Tibetan text Bardo Thodal, we find a striking observation. Human beings do not live in reality, but in projections created by their own minds. Translated into contemporary psychological language, we do not respond to reality itself. We respond to our internal interpretation of it, shaped by emotion and desire. This explains a paradox many people struggle to understand. Why do individuals look back on objectively chaotic or destructive periods and say, it was actually exciting, even enjoyable? Because the brain does not store reality. It stores emotionally charged fragments, especially those associated with intense stimulation. The case structure. In clinical settings, we occasionally encounter individuals with extreme behavioral patterns. Consider this composite profile. Persistent anxiety when not engaged in sexual interaction. Early exposure to transactional or high-intensity sexual environments. Use of sexual encounters to regulate stress and emotional tension. Occupational proximity to sexually charged environments. High alcohol consumption and impulsive spending. Minimal long-term financial stability. This is not adequately explained as high libido. Instead, psychology identifies a three-system interaction. Compulsive sexual behavior. Impulse-controlled dysregulation. Self-destructive reward processing. In other words, the behavior is not driven by desire, it is driven by maladaptive emotional coping. The 5 psychological functions of the behavior. Within this structure, sexual behavior serves 5 distinct regulatory functions. 1. Stress reduction. Neurochemicals such as dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins create immediate relief. The brain learns stress, sexual behavior, relief. Over time, this becomes a conditioned loop. 2. Relief from emptiness. Emptiness, clinically speaking, is not boredom. It is a diminished sense of self-existence. Sexual stimulation provides intense sensory input, temporarily restoring the feeling, I am alive, but the effect fades quickly, forcing repetition. 3. Validation of self-worth. Sexual attention communicates powerful signals. I am desired. I am chosen. For individuals with unmet emotional needs, this becomes a primary metric of value. 4. Avoidance of loneliness. The brain often misinterprets physical intimacy as emotional connection. The result: temporary relief without genuine relational depth, leading to recurring cycles of disconnection. 5. Escape from reality. High-intensity experiences narrow cognitive focus. During these moments, financial stress disappears. Identity concerns fade. Future anxiety is suspended. This functions as a form of psychological anesthesia. Why this is misunderstood. From the outside, many observers conclude this person simply has excessive sexual desire. But that interpretation is diagnostically inaccurate. The correct formulation is a dysregulated emotional system has outsourced its stabilization mechanism to high-intensity behavior. The deeper pattern stimulation over connection. One of the most consistent features in such cases is a shift from relationship seeking to stimulation seeking. Stable relationships feel predictable and therefore less stimulating. Uncertainty, novelty, and risk generate stronger neurological responses. The brain begins to prioritize intensity over stability. Immediate reward dominance. Another defining feature is preference for immediate gratification. Long-term achievements require sustained effort, but impulsive behaviors provide instant neurochemical rewards. Over time, the brain recalibrates. Fast reward becomes the default expectation. Collapse of long-term planning. Repeated impulsive behavior weakens executive function, particularly in the prefrontal cortex. The result: reduced foresight, impaired decision-making, diminished future orientation. The present moment dominates perception, loss of self-control. As stimulation increases, so does tolerance. This leads to escalation of behavior, reduced inhibitory control, reinforced habit loops. Eventually, the individual experiences not choice, but compulsion. The core insight. Let's distill this to its essence. The problem is not the behavior. The problem is the structure that generates the behavior. Until that structure is understood, the pattern will persist, regardless of changes in environment, partner, or circumstance. Why it feels enjoyable in retrospect. This is perhaps the most misunderstood element. Why do individuals recall such periods as fun? Because the brain encodes intensity, novelty, emotional peaks, but minimizes chronic instability, long-term consequences, psychological cost. Memory is not objective, it is selectively reconstructed. Final reflection. The ancient insight remains clinically relevant. Desire does not end in satisfaction. It escalates into stronger desire. And so the central question becomes, are you experiencing reality, or are you experiencing a pattern your mind has learned to repeat? What comes next? In part 2, we will examine a critical progression. Why these patterns often intensify after midlife. Why stable relationships fail to resolve the issue. How physical, emotional, and financial systems begin to deteriorate. And why, even then, the past may still be remembered as exciting. If this analysis helped you understand not just behavior, but the underlying architecture of the human mind, consider subscribing, liking, and sharing. Because insight, when shared, has the potential to interrupt repetition not just in one life, but in many. Thank you for your attention.